Anmol, it is great to have you back on the
Yes.
Hot Take Awards on the cinema from the South, Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu and Tamil cinema, which, as we know, is definitely where all the most exciting storytelling is.
So disappointing, where opulence and scale took over so much. The star-led movies, the commercial blockbusters not really hitting it.
Yeah.
But the understated stories, the underdog
Big budget,
stories,
yeah.
they're really doing well.
Let's start with our favorite big screen experience of the year, the films that really did feel like they got it right. I have a couple, but you go first.
For me personally, was Loka.
Yeah.
Loka was an absolutely amazing theatrical experience.
Yeah.
I think it also had to do with the trailer not really giving away much,
Yeah.
and us exploring that story and how beautifully intertwined it is with something very personal to people from Kerala,
Yeah.
and still doing a vampire take on it. I thought the action was so slick. I thought Naslin was so good.
Yeah. I have
and-
him on so many of my lists.
yeah, and just Kalyani, I felt like got the memo right on point. I would also add, for me, Kantara Chapter
Same.
1.
That was the other one on my list.
That IMAX experience was beautiful,
Yeah.
and I had briefly interacted with Rishabh, and you usually get scared with these sequels that
Yeah.
grow in size, and it feels like he did everything he could
Yeah.
to make this, the best experience of the year. So these were the two films for me.
I completely agree on those. Loka, I remember watching it, I think I saw it at least twice. I was like, one of the coolest films of the year. It works on so many levels. And yes, Kantara for me is the best big screen experience of the year
Yeah.
from Indian cinema. There was so much. I really got a sense of hundreds and hundreds of people putting their life on the line to just bring every frame to life. From an execution perspective, I was absolutely floored. I mean, obviously, I had issues with it. It felt like three
Same.
films in one. It was very jam-packed. It was sort of the pacing sometimes was breathless. But no, I was completely. I had that Bahubali-esque feeling of how the hell did they pull that
Yeah.
off? And because it's something we talk about a lot, I really appreciated that they concluded the film. There were so many
yes.
opportunities to just do a Nishanchi, and they didn't. And I really appreciated that. But yeah.
I mean, they're still saying there are multiple chapters ahead,
Yeah.
so who knows?
I had two Underdogs, which I had were immensely fun cinematic experiences. One was Alapura Gymkhana from Malayalam cinema. It again Naslin, who is for me one of the sort of figures who stole the year. But I had such a blast with that film. It's one of the best times I've had at the movies this year. Such a fun sports drama, but also sort of a weird anti-sports drama. It doesn't follow the formula you thought of. It's also a brotherhood movie. It's also sort of a comedy. But the way it sort of toys with, and nobody does style like him, and the way it sort of toyed with the idea of masculinity, and sort of it definitely isn't the film we thought, and refuses to follow that path. But it's just such a fun time with just so much craft and dedication going in. The other one I had, which again, not of the typical scale blockbuster variety, but I physically couldn't look away from the screen, is Bison. I kept thinking of this idea of craft. People talk about how craft is something only we care about, cinephiles, critics, whatever, and why would an audience care? And you think of, I thought of like Ryan Coogler, I think of Nolan, Sinners, Oppenheimer. The idea of, for me, what craft means is you physically cannot look away from the screen. And I thought the way Bison did this, you just cannot look away. The way he uses sort of filmmaking, visual, sound, you just cannot.
I sometimes wonder, when you will really break it down, it's a sports biopic.
Yeah.
But it is so engaging
Yeah.
from the personal story that was showcased. And I remember that frame of him standing in the field like
Yeah.
the Buddha statue.
Yeah.
You're just looking at like a masterpiece, man.
Yeah.
And with Murray Selvaraj, what I must commend, what I've noticed at least with the Tamil cinema market, is that, he made this movie called Vade.
Yeah.
And
Last year.
it's with a little boy
Yeah.
who's the star of that movie, and it still had a patronage in that state.
Yeah.
And I love that Bison's also doing so well, and that is the balance that I crave for, that, I associate with the 2000s of Hindi cinema,
Yeah.
or when UTV had its revolution.
Yeah.
That,
The golden years.
yeah, that we had a population that would tune in
Yeah.
every weekend.
We go back to the next one, which is the Matlab Kuch Bhi Award. For what were they smoking? For could be a film, could be a moment of like, what on earth were they thinking?
So, I got slightly confused about like what exactly to focus on. I have two
Yeah.
options. One is, I think, what people felt was the saturation of a legend not evolving with time, and
Yeah.
that people felt with Shankar,
Yeah.
and his obsession with grand music videos.
Yeah.
And Game Changer essentially became this weird concoction of special effects integrated with music videos, which are so literal to the lyrics being said. It was really shocking to me when, the producer himself was talking about on the amount of money that is being spent on these music videos that have no place in the screenplay, by the way. So, there was a novelty to these music videos because he's done this consistently throughout his filmography.
Yeah, the set pieces.
Yes, but the novelty goes away, and that was one. And the second for me was, I was really looking forward to They Call Him OG because of Sujit and what was, at least from an ambition perspective, attempted with Saho.
Yeah.
What I notice also is, from a pan-India level, an obsession with Japan.
Yeah.
Okay, and everything samurai, everything yakuza, and Pushpa, War 2. But I feel like it's a very surface level approach, which does the katanas, will do some calligraphy in the background, and some samurais land up, but it doesn't have depth. And with They Call Him OG, they attempt to create a backstory or an origin story of him being from that land. And what I found funny was that this moment in the climax where he's fighting Imran Hashmi, but he goes in a Japanese monologue. And Imran, with his expression, just looks slightly confused. But the monologue carries on for about 3 or 4 minutes while he is surrounded by goons, but they give him the time to give the speech. So that was one of them.
Mine isn't technically a film from one of the four industries in the South, but we were talking about it, so I'm going to decide it counts. We'll come back to War 2. It is just, it is the sort of NTR entry sequence and just what they did with his stardom, or I guess didn't do. Like I know with those films it must be very difficult to balance two very sort of massive stardoms. But yeah, it really at times came off looking silly. It just, what they did with his aura and presence, it definitely wasn't in the hands of someone who knows how to really amplify play with stardom. And it was really a disservice to him because the idea of those two clashing is so exciting. So that was mine. For this brand of filmmaking, these is masala action films, which we love when they're done well. It speaks to the way sort of Tamil filmmakers or Telugu cinema filmmakers can tap into that in a way that Hindi cinema filmmakers can't. Just bringing presence and aura for that sort of language of filmmaking where you feel it. And we felt that in Jawan is a great example of that, where you feel like if that's the kind of film you want to make, there's so much that can be done, which doesn't feel like we have the
And that's what our expectation was with the NTR entry.
Exactly.
Some people tell me that it's vocabulary. It's just not there, or it was in the 70s with Amitabh Sir's films. It just got lost in the process. But it's crazy because when I was just 2 days ago watching K3G on cable, and Karan Johar celebrates the actors. From the foot hitting the floor, from the ultimate reveal, it's almost he's built in with the mass cinema, which got lost, I guess.
The next one was The Gem We Didn't See Coming.
So this for me is, usually when I do cover, say, a Hindi film on a Friday, I usually get the comments already of like, this is the one that you need to go to, because usually the Hindi movie is disappointing. And the Telugu subscriber base had recommended me Court. And it was such
State versus Nobody.
And it was such an engaging watch. I thought the performances were lovely, especially of the two leads, the young actors. And I usually go in for legal proceeding films and assume it to be slightly jolly LLB dramatic level.
Because we've seen these films so many times.
But I found it to be really grounded in its approach, and I found Priyadarshi to be so good in the film, and Shivaji is the antagonist was amazing. So that was a huge surprise for me. Another movie that I saw when it came on the streaming platform was Tourist Family.
That was going to be mine.
Which I loved. And there is a lot of discourse about the movie and what message it gives out. But I felt like it was a story about this family. I thought the unit itself was so wholesome and I was invested throughout.
And it's such a sweet film for the heart. It really is. And again, another film where, in a world where there are so many big films we're looking forward to, you just don't see coming. And that one really stole it, for sure. The Dud on Arrival Award.
Dud on Arrival, I had Game Changer. For me, what happened was the marketing material already, the trailers, everything was giving off energy of things that Shankar has already done, which is, political conspiracy, a fraud being exposed, and righteous man leading the way, and it just didn't make sense to me. A lot of it, and it's coupled with everything we associate with commercial cinema, but done in a dated fashion. And then the love story with Kiara Advani is also like the most odd, because her point of conflict is that he wants to become an IPS, and that builds a rage within him. A lot of it was very confusing, and what I especially hated was that S.J. Surya is one of the most overused villains with Tamil and Telugu cinema now, and he's also become a caricature in the process, and the point of conflict itself was not very exciting. I almost like foreshadowed it while I was watching the trailer.
And you're so right about S.J. Surya. And when you enjoy watching someone so much, it becomes very sad when they start sort of using him in the same way. I have two. One is very harsh, but we can't not talk about Thug Life. It's weird. I kept thinking about in the months leading up to that film. We were so curious about, okay, so it's Mani Ratnam trying to operate within, these are the rules. These are the kind of films people want to watch. Let me add my stamp. We were so full. We were so excited.
That announcement video.
Yeah, it was. But the sense of tragedy that people felt, I've spoken to so many people about it, and it's not about, forget the word disappointment. It truly felt like a tragedy. So many people who feel like his world of cinema, the great filmmakers where it's not about thriving commercial cinema. We're just looking to root for anything. And the fact that this disappointed so much, it felt like he was completely conforming. Maybe there's a lot that film was trying to do which I did not connect with, but for me it was just so reductive, and it's trying to do what everyone has done and is doing better. I was very snarky, when I was watching the film, thinking that, could Kamal Hassan not get Lokesh Kanagaraj's dates? They just wanted to make a very typical action film, and why would you go to Mani Ratnam for that? That's not what we want from him, and it felt neither here nor there on so many levels, and it was just heartbreaking.
Very heartbreaking, and I remember being visibly like uncomfortable watching the movie, and the several plot lines that it was following. It was very, very sad.
The composer of the year, because a great sort of soundtrack and BGM is sort of the lifeblood of cinephiles these days. When we see it come alive, I mean, we're all addicted to those at the end of the year. So what was yours?
Why don't you go first in this, Suchin? Because I think we'll have a
I have a very basic pitch answer. I think that the impact and power of Anirudh has never been stronger than in Coolie, and sort of the value of his contribution, because the film doesn't work for me completely. It has great moments, but I think with Lokesh we've seen that he's not a 5 great moments filmmaker. He's more, and this felt like a 5 great moments film. But there's so much of that film, that energy, that coolness, the fact that even though it's disappointing, there's so many sequences we're having a blast. There were so many times in that film I remember feeling like I'm not feeling the adrenaline, but I'm convinced of it because the film is convinced of it. And I realized that's really because of him, the way he can uplift stuff. Like, for example, there are no life-changing action sequences in that film that we've come to expect from Lokesh. These ideas, there are some fun moments of swag, but for me, it really is a testament to how Anirudh can uplift a film, because so much of my experience of that film, I really do think is because of him. Like uplifting sort of decent material versus something that really stands out.
That's what I feel, is especially with Anirudh and Jailer. Basic sequences that get elevated so much, you remember them. Anirudh was amazing in Coolie. For me, it was both movies that didn't really work for me from a storyline perspective, but Taman and what he did in They Call Him OG and Daku Maharaj. Daku Maharaj, at least from the filmography of Balakrishnan that I followed in the last 6 or 7 years, is probably one of his better films. And Taman really elevates the action set pieces. It has one of the best introduction shots I've seen of the star in a long time. And, he is criticized often for almost having like a blaring soundtrack, which almost the PVR speakers also can't deal with. But he really put his best foot forward, and, he elevated sort of how the script meandered in They Call Him OG. He was the one who was actually keeping it together. So I think he really did a great job this year.
Nice. The other one I had as an honorable mention is I really like what Jake Joy did with Loka.
Yes.
When you think of that film, the very fact that the music comes to your mind, the fact that it, for me, I still listen to it all the time, it finds that middle gap between thrilling and fun, which is what we look for in a great big screen experience, but it is also, there's a sense of, it is emotional, it is layered, it is sort of in keeping with the sophistication of the film, but still just a really, really great soundtrack. So no, I love what he did with that. The villain of the year.
I loved Gulshan Devaiya in Kantara.
Yeah.
Okay. Worked for me really well, and I understand that it progresses to changing the tide on who the main antagonist is. You'll see it when you see it, but I felt like he was on point with his character. He was a drunk loser, entitled as hell, and I felt like he was on point with that consistently.
Yeah.
And everyone was assuming that Gulshan as an antagonist, I feel like a lot of people project what their idea of a villain should be.
Yeah.
And some of them were not liking the fact that he was just a drunk loser.
Yeah.
But I felt it was such an interesting choice for him to just barge into that forest and assume that everything's going to be fine. I remember that frame of him on the horse as all the fireballs are going into the jungle, and wondering that, this man has it out for him. Like, he is going to die.
Yeah.
But I loved that kind of delusion, that kind of ignorance. I loved him. And Shivaji, the main antagonist in Court.
Yeah.
I loved him in that. I thought he was unapologetically horrible.
Yeah.
And he was amazing. Yeah.
I was actually going to say Kantara as well. I agree with you on Gulshan. It's actually, I think, quite a difficult role to pull off, because you sell him as a loser, this sort of funny drunk character, this useless son, but when he needs to bring it, which is that interval sequence, he needs to be ruthless. You need to be scared of how willing he is to kill everyone, and it works. That sinisterness, the fact that he could deliver on both ends, given in mind that he's not the larger villain. And I did also, I like the idea of it more than its reality, but the ending twist, the fact that, I still feel like, I thought that was quite interesting, and I liked how they landed that. Just as a notable mention, before the film stops knowing what to do with him, the presence of Shobin in Coolie, the way, I guess that's predominantly the first half, but just that presence he brought of, I would be scared to be in the presence of this person. And the promise and idea of where this character could go, and then it seems to literally go everywhere. But that to me was more than anyone else in that film. The most fun and the least exciting cameo of the year.
Okay, I'll start with, let's positive first.
Okay.
For me, I loved Tovino and Dulquer in Loka.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. I
Loka
found Tovino to be so entertaining, and this is up his alley completely, and I am so excited about the potential of his universe and his film. I still feel from a staging point of view, they could have still teased Dulquer a little better, because the hair gave it away so easily. But both of them were so good, and there I loved how they did their announcement video, of them bantering with each other. I was thinking about it, contemplating that if the two stars from Hindi cinema would do this announcement, they'll shoot it separately and they'll superimpose their images where the eye lines won't match. But anyway, both of them were so entertaining. Those were the best for mine.
I agree. I still think from an impact perspective, the Shobin cameo from Loka, because the others, because we had so much time with them and it worked brilliantly. But you just see this flash and you completely get a sense of this world. It expands it so excitingly, the way the audience all cheered, and the idea of where could this go, and obviously with the other two characters, it sort of tells us, which is exciting. And that to me is a true blue cameo. Someone who just comes there for a second and your heart just erupts. But you're not delivering yet. We're just sort of, it's left to our memory. Now, the least exciting, I guess this one is sort of almost undeniable. It was Amir in Coolie. I was actually thinking a lot about Tovino, because this whole, the discourse around his cameo, around Amir's cameo was so interesting, because we were all so excited about Amir being presented, with that star aura. That's clearly not the direction they went into. So that's already you sort of disengaging people. Then there was this big back and forth between so many people defending it, saying, but he's not supposed to be a badass, he's a cartoon. And then my pushback to that would be, okay, if there's a great way to do a cartoon.
Exactly.
I didn't feel the comedy, I didn't feel the silliness, like.
Suchin, it felt like they were winging it.
Yeah.
And, even, so I understand that he might be a clown.
Yeah.
Of the way
to clown.
And of the way you've written them. But I know from a styling perspective, you thought that was a cool outfit. Of him coming in his box, whatever, basketball shorts or whatever he was wearing. it did not look cool.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that even from a clown perspective,
Yeah.
your first introduction is him being, annoyed that
Yeah.
the automatic is not on. And he's unhinged.
Yeah.
So he is going on a psychotic spree of killing everyone.
Yeah.
I felt nothing
Yeah.
in terms of fear.
Yeah.
And then, when you do really do a deep dive on characters' writing and how it ties into what they saw Rajnikant as
Yeah.
in childhood, it's
Yeah.
not consistent
Yeah.
on how he would be so forgiving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the BD sequence, it just seemed like they winged it on set.
Yeah.
And if people were so excited about it, it would have led to the spin-off that they were
Yeah.
thinking about, but I don't think that will happen.
And when I heard that pushback, I kept thinking of cartoons I like in terms of cartoons done right.
Yeah.
There's a case to be made completely different worlds and genres. That Raghav Juyal has cartoonish moments in Pads of Bollywood, but you see how well that lands. You could Kulchan and Kantara, you could argue that there's a cartoonish vibe to that.
Yeah.
Tovino and Loka to me is very cartoony, but in such a delightful way, without sort of losing that sense of cool. And yeah, this really felt like a disappointment through.
And we weren't in the jokes. We were almost like laughing
Yeah.
at like. I became like slightly defensive about it because I feel like as Hindi cinema viewers we have like ownership of these stars,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we get heartbroken that they're not presented well.
Because the idea of seeing Amir,
Yeah.
in that world presented in that way is such an exciting thought. I do I do think that his cameo in Badge of Bollywood sort of singularly at least salvaged something.
So lovely.
Because I loved how that was done.
Yeah.
The Why Is This Still a Thing award for something that still baffles you. Is there some sort of consistent
So-
thing that makes you wonder like why?
There are two things that I definitely see, which is that I was seeing a old reel of how would Hindi cinema in the 2000s cut to the song.
Yeah.
Okay, and there was a clip of Salman Khan from Partner
Yeah.
calling out to Lara Datta.
Yeah.
He's calling her like names,
Yeah.
Juliet or whatever, and then he goes "Te quiero, te quiero."
Yeah.
And it's just a transition so that that word makes sense in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
song.
There was some
So,
effort.
so the breakaway to Suraj Hua Madham, those
Yeah.
kind of breaks, in Telugu commercial cinema, you see it with item songs.
Yeah.
So the plot is carrying on, and it'll be an abrupt break to the item song.
Yeah.
And that's become consistent with most star-led films.
Yeah.
The second thing that I get slightly exhausted with is whoever has a good run as a villain in Hindi cinema or has a one big hit
Yeah.
will do a slate of Telugu commercial films.
Yeah.
So Sanjay Dutt,
Yeah.
Bobby Deol right
Yeah.
now, they are doing such forgettable roles in
Yeah.
these big commercial films. And Bobby was in Daku Maharaj,
Yeah.
he was in the Pavan Kalyan movie called
Nawaz has done a
HHVVM.
Rajnikant film.
Nawaz did a Rajnikant film back in the day.
Kartik movie. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it gets tiring, and sometimes I feel like even Sanjay Dutt's tired sometimes. So, to see him in the Lokesh Kanagraj movie, he's coming in the Prabhas movie now, and I think this is all an impact of what KGF did for him.
Yeah.
I don't really think sometimes it fits the characters,
Yeah.
and it's a popularity contest of
Yeah.
spaces in India.
Versus like really doing something interesting with
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the two things.
No, that's fair. I had a very irritating cinephile complaint. It's very specific, but it gets to me a lot. At a time where the kind of films we're talking about, Kantara, Loka, they have a massive audience sitting here in Bombay and stuff. The effort it takes and the mad dash every week of trying to understand what has subtitles and what doesn't is insane to me. And I'm not talking about the Oscar film. I understand that, but the fact that till today, when these are most often the most exciting films that are making the most money, that we are still scratching our heads every time trying to figure out where to go, whether there are subtitles, whether there aren't, who PVR may or may not be fighting at that time.
Yeah. Oh my God, yes.
Who and I completely understand from a producer's perspective whether to dub, whether these are complicated things, but just to signal to an audience clearly, because it's not just us. There is a lot of people wanting to go for these films, but the fact that it's still so draining and tiring is pretty surprising.
And what's crazy is, Suchin, and I'm sure you may have experienced this, it will say English subtitles on the app, and sometimes it's not
They
there.
don't have that, yeah.
And yes, I mean, I have been at a 7 a.m. Kalki show and being like, what the hell?
And the amount we all have to message each other just to, like a support group to figure out, like,
Does it?
yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
The star that won the year.
I think this for me is Pradeep Ranganathan.
Okay. I had him.
Because he did Dragon and Dude, and even though Dragon didn't entirely work for me, and I do fear Pradeep also falling into routine with his isms that he integrates, which are, I feel, an homage to Tamil cinema and its stars like Dhanush and Rajnikant. But I hope he doesn't get stuck there. But I feel like to create a space for himself as a leading man.
After 4 films.
4 films, and you know, he has a crazy story. He used to do digital content online. If you go back to his tweets, he used to give really unfiltered thoughts about movies. And you know, to create a space for himself like that. And I do root for him a lot because I think he has some great creative ideas. And I think Love Today was extremely well made from an editing perspective. And I really root for him for also the backlash that he gets, and you know, on how he meets it head on, and you know, he
hasn't been embraced.
Yes, and he gets a lot of abuse, you know, for you know, what people consider to be conventionally attractive for male leads, but he is, you know, really creating a niche for himself, and I feel like I love that I can be in Delhi for Dude. And it's a packed hall. So that says a lot for what he's doing.
I agree. I mean, I have to say the first film of his I saw was Dude, and you can't not be taken by his stardom. Yes, at times it feels imposed and reverse engineered, but still, you know, even though the film didn't work for me, you know, I felt like I was in the presence of a star, and to see how far he's come with just 4 films, and the idea that he's a filmmaker. You know, he's a filmmaker turned actor. That also makes it very exciting. So I had him. I had Rishabh Shetty. From a perspective of just the insanity of writer, director, star, of what he has pulled off, it's an insane achievement. The sneaky one I also had was Naslin. He was in Alapuda Gymkhana, which I absolutely loved. And of course, Loka. I have to say, a bit of a controversial thing, but Kalyani was fantastic in that. For me, Naslin is the heart of that film. He's the character. Maybe it's because we see the film through his eyes, maybe because we're discovering the world through him, but that first half, which really grounds us into that sort of slacker comedy world, you feel for him so much, and it's through him that you sort of fall for her. And again, not to take away from everything that does for the idea of a female superhero, which we, you know, need more of, but Naslin is, from a pure emotional connection perspective, Naslin is the presence I felt in that film the most.
Suchin, have you noticed, at least with the horror comedy genre, there's almost a consistent feature of the male lead almost being same. Like, I sometimes wonder if Ayushmann, Varun and Raj were in the same room, they would react and run away from danger the same way. But I guess that's also like the easiest storytelling mode to a fish out of the water situation.
And in that context, it works well in Bhedia, and especially Street. It really doesn't in Thama. But yeah, for me, like, maybe you consider it as I'm very much signing up to everything the star does next. You know, Naslin is there for me. The filmmaker that won the year.
For me, it's Murray Selvaraj for what he did with Bison, and Dominic Karun again for Loka. With Murray Selvaraj, I'm just absolutely, like, I feel so motivated for cinema itself that, you know, there's a patronage for this kind of cinema. It gets celebrated.
We're in good hands.
And you know, when us in the Hindi speaking states do communicate the brilliance of these movies, they often get dismissive criticism of, you know, it's the same old with Tamil cinema, but that's the point of this kind of cinema, because it's important to show us what we're dealing with as a society. And I think it was a triumph what he did with Bison. And Dominic Arun, again, I think the potential of this universe is insane. And I think, you know, what I felt with Thama was that it was just a springboard for that universe that they wanted to create, but this was true to its, you know, the lore of Loka. And it just beautifully, like, just teased us what could be the potential. I think it's a marvel, even though Dulquer says that this budget is huge for them, it's crazy on what they're capable of, man.
100%. I completely agree with you on both counts. And the only thing I'd add on Mari Selvaraj is, you know, we are so, especially in Hindi cinema, we're so conditioned to the message movie. You know, it is the film with the agenda, being lectured at, etc. We're used to it. You can see the calculation on screen. And for what Mari Selvaraj does, and Paranjit does this as well, the idea of what they're saying so honestly and passionately is so cinematic. You know, the idea of what I want to say and the way I'm saying it blends beautifully, where Bison is completely a sports drama. It's also so many other things, and you never feel like, okay, the narrative is now paused for them to tick that box and then come back to it, which we so often feel here. So, no, I completely agree with those. On the same vein, then a filmmaker that needs to revisit the drawing board.
I think it would be Shankar. I say this with the utmost respect because one of the first theatrical experiences of me watching a Tamil movie was Robot.
Yeah.
And, I have very fond memories of the scale at which he would present these stories.
Yeah.
And I remember even watching 2.0 and being blown away by, what they were attempting, and seeing Akshay Kumar as the villain. It was also new to us. And I feel like, with both Indian 2, which was, I think, even more heartbreaking than Game Changer.
Indian 2 was unwatchable.
Yes. It's almost, a lot of people say this with Shankar sir, that he was associated with a writer called Sujata, who was a consistent feature in his life. And since then, it's somewhat of like not really understanding what that voice was.
And you feel the absence.
Yeah, you feel the absence of Sujata in his movies. And I really felt with these two movies and the scale at which they were made and such what led to such disastrous results, I think there needs to be a re-engineering of what to do now.
Mine for this was Lokesh, and context being, I'm not saying that as someone who, Coolie is by no means a disaster. It's not like someone who needs to reinvent themselves, none of that stuff. But I remember distinctly feeling this when I was watching it. It felt like the least Lokesh film. You feel like, it's in service of many other things. The voice is diluted to go for the sake of big. He still does it better than most people. But the idea of everything we love him for, and I remember just distinctly feeling that I wish we could get a film from him where he sticks to what he does so well. And I thought of like a Kaidi or like a Kill, just something that's just like relentless action or something that, I guess what people call scaling down, rather than just, it's so easy to, I guess, lose yourself in these massive films. And sort of going back to what feels like home, or maybe what we want from him. And keeping in mind, he's an incredibly commercial filmmaker. Nobody's asking for like a character-driven I'm not talking about those films. It'd still be a very thrilling thing, but something that just takes a step back versus just trying to do bigger and bigger star projects.
I concur.
Yeah, where maybe the best way of phrasing it is where Lokesh is the star.
Yeah.
And because, we very much are the audience for that.
Even though in every interview, Lokesh will say, this is 100% my film. You're like, is it?
Yeah, I remember with all of his films, you always make that calculation. Is this a him film? On a closing note, the most thrilling set piece of the year.
Vikram is one of my favorite actors from Tamil cinema. Okay, I don't know whether it is the case of rooting for the underdog and him being a star who doesn't get the deserved love compared to the amount of effort that he puts into his characters. So Veera Dheera Suran, which came out this year, there is a set piece where he comes to SJ Surya's station where he is essentially saying that I'm guilty, take me. And he has this almost like jute bag on his side, which he metamorphosizes into a gun and shoots one of the villains. And that coupled with just his body language in that movie of almost like a bomb about to burst always. And you feel the tension. I feel like he's one of the best artists come stars that we have in India. And I feel like this movie also didn't do really well when it came out in theaters. It was one of my favorite films of the year. And there's something there's a simmering tension that he holds throughout the movie, which for me peaked when SJ Surya reacts blown away by what he's done. So that was one.
Just the pure conviction is over to use term, but the submission to the character, like you feel the effort, and not in a way that's a necessarily showy performance. And I mean that in sort of in the best way. So mine was Kantara. That entire chariot sequence in the first half, I was so floored by it. It was the first time where my eyes lit up to give me a sense of the experience of the film we're in for. And I always say that with films like this, we are so used to and conditioned to looking over the rough edges. You'll have a wonky piece of VFX here, a stunt scene, an action scene where we know what they're going for. The execution doesn't live up to the vision. Half the time we're saying, okay, fine, I know what you're going for. In my brain, we're always made to be so forgiving. I found this so seamless. From an execution, action perspective, VFX, editing, it all came together so beautifully to say that one thing we so often with Hollywood films, of how the hell did they pull that off?
Yeah.
And I was so floored by it. And I was just so sort of, just like a kid in a candy store. And yeah, I was like, that was just so beautifully done. Where, again, execution lived up to vision. So yeah, I think set pieces wise, Kantara is the one that comes to mind.
For sure.
But no, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Suchin. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always
on and off camera discussing movies with you. Yes.
Always. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anmol Jamwal, and you can catch me on The Hot Take only on Hook.